Chris Thomas is here in the studio. We're looking back on your last year and looking ahead to the next. And Chris, we've been asking everyone about the COVID thing as a starting point, how the government's handled it. And of course, you in this incredible, interesting situation, because you've been inside the tent, now you're outside, and we'll come on to that, I'm sure, a great deal. How do you think they've dealt with it?
Better than across, but not quite as well as they could have done and should have done.
Can you give an example of what they could have done better?
So we could have closed the border earlier, and we could have closed the border in a better way earlier.
Was that hindsight, though?
No,
really?
not at all. That's what I was arguing for in terms of February, March, even through April. I took on responsibility for the borders through May. I was taking the orders to Tynwald, and we could have done that whole process better. We can come to that in more detail. Secondly, they should have focused it on shielding vulnerable people and on the care sector. I actually listened to Chris Robertshaw's interview you made and just put up a couple of days ago, and he's completely right. The focus was the same focus that has been problematic for the Isle of Man for years, decades even, which is the focus was all on health, was on the hospital. But in this situation, what we needed to do was we needed to focus on social care. We needed to focus on keeping it out of the care homes, but more importantly, we needed to make sure that vulnerable people in the community understood early on the real risks and shielding. So I live that. I live with my son. I think most people know my son is profoundly disabled, is in a wheelchair. I took him out of the system middle of March, before lockdown and before the borders were closed, because we wanted to look after the risks to which he was exposed. But every day through the lockdown, we walked out on the promenade because he loves seeing cars and he loves the countryside and noises and people, and so we managed the risk well. And with hindsight, I hope everybody looks back and says, wouldn't it have been better to come out of the lockdown earlier, because people understood their own risks and shielded themselves better? So we could have done that. So I've given you 3 criticisms there already.
And you were in Comyn at this time,
I was in Comyn until the end of May.
Now. Come on then. So what was it like? What was the discussion like in there? Lockdown, not lockdown. How much do we do? Was it everyone on the same side, or was there quite a lot of discussion?
No, there was a lot of
you were saying you were saying lockdown earlier.
I was not lockdown earlier. I'm talking about the borders.
Borders closed. Yes,
the borders. I tweeted middle of March. I tweeted middle of March. Avoid unnecessary travel. To me, it was a game that was being played. That we weren't going to say exactly what day it was going to come down. It was a week or so later than was originally planned. We should have been decisive, and we should have had better arrangements in place, prepared earlier.
And a feisty discussion inside the Council of Ministers,
to an extent, but the information wasn't really there. I mean, a question I've asked over the summer was to the extent to which people have been looking for this advice, looking for the advice, but in actual fact the advice wasn't really as written down as it might well have been. So there aren't really the documents to uncover. It was always very much an officer going to one group and then that being permeated something down, and that would upset me. I'm a firm person in preparing things properly and having the options on the table. I think at some point you'll probably get out my orange and purple manifesto.
I'm coming to that now, because we're going to park this.
And what I would say is, I'm a firm. One of my pledges to the people who made me their representative was that we should have all the options on the table, and we should have information about what they mean. And I think we let ourselves down slightly in terms of that. There were certain people who were making the decisions, and then the decisions were carried out, and we could have had a richer discussion about options that we had back in March and April, and that's another criticism.
Let's look back. Go on, bring it up.
Okay.
This is every year you bring this in. This is
only because I know you want it. Paul,
you made it a point, I think, a couple of years ago.
So it's 2 manifestos. It's my 2013 one and my 2016
the by-election one, wasn't it, at first?
The by-election one and the
and I've got your manifesto. Is that the same as this then?
Yeah, that's the same one. The 2016 and the 2013. All these pledges.
And I thought maybe we, as it's the end of the thing, do you want to tick off your list of what's done? How did you do?
We ought to treat this the same as you've been treating other interviews. Let's focus mostly on the last year.
Yes.
Because it will be, to answer another question you're likely to ask me, am I standing? Yes. I don't know why you keep saying, why can't you declare that you're standing? Because the law applies. I think whoever told you that, don't trust them completely in the future.
So you can actually announce without getting under the starter's orders?
Yeah. The elections law is now in place, the new elections law. Even the old one said that within the election effectively starts a year before the election. We're in the last year. year. And once you act as a candidate, you should be careful about what you spend, because we're trying to make elections fair. We're trying to avoid the fact that somebody can come in and spend £20,000 when somebody else is only spending £5,000. The great thing about the Manx public is they have personal representation. That people go and knock on their doors and they talk to them, they phone them up, they discuss things with them on Facebook and on Twitter, and that's what elections are about. We don't need to come to the Isle of Man a sort of PR agenda of politicians. We're not the United Kingdom, we're not the United States. We don't want the big spenders to come here and manipulate elections by manipulating public service media and social media.
Okay. How was your last year, to keep it exactly on the same levels?
I'm pleased with where I am now. The decision that I won in Tynwald but got sacked about was the right decision. Tynwald agreed with me, the Manx public seems to agree with me. Planning is a very important issue, and I think that was yet another demonstration that I'm a principled public representative, and I will fight and die as I did in that point.
Well, let's talk about this. I mean, you were sacked, you used that word, so you put yourself up ready for it though, didn't you? Basically, you kind of led yourself over that cliff face voluntarily.
And I just
knowing that you were going to be...
No, I didn't believe that the Chief Minister would actually sack me, but I understood that there was a risk that he would, because I blatantly shouldn't have been sacked. Again, we'll go back to PR and versus public service media and the real news. I mean, I felt as if I was attacked in the 2 or 3 days after I was sacked. So, for instance, Jeff the Mongoose invited me in, having already posted how I deserved to be sacked because of their interpretation of collective responsibility. But collective responsibility was changed in 2017, and even though it's quite clear that my position on planning was in my manifesto and was in my actions in Tynwald for years, all the time I've been in the House of Keys in Tynwald, I've taken motions, even moved legislation. Secondly, we agreed in 2017 to keep people like Alf Cannon, myself and Kate Beecroft in the Council of Ministers at that point, that collective responsibility would only apply when it was to do with a matter of the programme for government, a matter of the budget, or the Council of Ministers had agreed it was a matter of national importance, and clearly the issue I got fired on wasn't agreed by the Council of Ministers to be a matter of national importance.
So 1 minute you're saying you were sacked in that sense, but you knew there's a risk you were going to be sacked, but you're now saying that you shouldn't have been sacked.
I definitely shouldn't have been sacked, and so therefore
there's no appeal process here, is there?
Of course there isn't. It's the Chief Minister's individual. The Chief Minister makes a decision, and that's wrong. So although governance is not perceived by normal people, real people, as being the most important issue, because what matters for people is their income from their job or from their pension or their health or their education of their children, real issues like that, there are still flaws in the governance of the Isle of Man, and one of those, and Dominic Delaney made this point really clearly back in the big debate that I organised back in 2014-15, is the Chief Minister has too many powers that he, and it always has been he, unfortunately, can use, and we need to constrain those politically and also now, I think, in law, because the Chief Minister, believed his own self-worth through more and more through the last 2 or 3 years.
There's this criticism he's gone very presidential.
Presidential, and if not regal sometimes.
These press conferences are quite staggering. I mean, I don't go to them anymore at the moment because we can't go in the same room, so that's just... And I've got another issue which I can't talk about in a minute. But... What's the answer to this? Clipping the wings, giving more...
So the answer to this is, one of my successes over the 5 years that you asked me for is that the next Chief Minister will be elected only by the House of Keys. There won't be the Legislative Council involved. The second way to do this is to look again at the Council of Ministers Act, and if somebody else doesn't bring forward a private member's bill to do that in the next year, I will. On the Tynwald order paper, this first one in October, there's a motion from Daphne Kane to actually look again at how the Chief Minister announces their Chief Minister candidate, and I would like to make sure that the Chief Minister associates him or herself with a group of people in a more collegiate way, in a more cooperative way before the election, so the Manx public, through their candidates they elect in the House of Keys, can be quite clear about the policies they want and the people they want involved in their council ministers. And then after the election, I personally believe that we need to look at the Council of Ministers Act and see whether we should go back to the Manx way of appointing the council ministers, which was traditionally that there was a confirmation vote from the Chief Minister's nominations inside the House of Keys. So that'll be on the table inside the next...
I want to deal with what has happened, but we're running out of time on this section, but has it got personal between you and...
Not at all. I've tried always to just turn the other cheek,
Has it got personal from his side, do you think?
I think sometimes he's been scornful of me, which I regret. So,
but you're not the only one. It seems, if you cross him, you can be off his Christmas card.
Yeah, so I don't think that's helpful. And he is a very caring person. He's been very helpful in times when I've needed personal support. And the most important thing, which I think he understands, is the national interest or the public policy interest. To me, I got a lot of criticism in July because I turned the other cheek a bit too much, according to many people out there in the Isle of Man. When he was just telling lies about my position on the borders and telling lies about the involvement to do with the gas regulation, I just decided to just let's leave it. And even now, I'm just going to leave it because.
Well, we'll come to the end of this part, but in part two, we're going to deal with what's coming up.